Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Huge controversy at the Austin Grand Prix and what is a massive moment for this year's World Drivers' Championships. The Ferrari's in a different league today, but Lando Norris in drama from the start of the race, getting forced off track by Max Verstappen on the very first lap when he loses several positions, and then when it really mattered in the fight for third place, which could well prove to be critical in this year's championship, this incredibly controversial incident at the end of the race, Lando gets a 5-second penalty. McLaren understandably are not happy about it, especially given the context that happened earlier in the Grand Prix when Russell got a 5-second penalty. Are these situations different? Yes, on some level, but does that mean that the stewards are right on this one? Not necessarily, but very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always. Man, do we have a lot to get into today. The feeling was that Red Bull were so much better. Max said, oh, we've binned all our upgrades that we planned since Monza, we finally figured it out, we brought this major upgrade, and honestly, the Red Bull looked indomitable most of this weekend. Max is in position to destroy Lando's pole lap yesterday, but eventually he comes in second. The Ferraris are a couple of tenths back, as they have been in qualifying pace so far. But we also knew the Ferraris looked very good in race trim yesterday. I said that all the battling the Ferraris did in yesterday's sprints, and they still finished only a handful of seconds off Max. Clearly, the Ferrari was a strong car around here in race pace, and that's honestly very impressive what Ferrari have done. We'll talk more about that in a second. But Max, after yesterday's sprint and qualifying, said, this is, so long since I felt a car this good underneath me. To be honest, I don't even remember when that was. Certainly we're doing very well in the fast corners. The balance problems have effectively been solved on some level, and he says we've taken a very good step. And that is true on some level, but it's not so clear. Drama, though, elsewhere down the field. This weekend was meant to be a good one for Mercedes. And if Mercedes were good this weekend, then who knows, maybe Ferrari don't end up getting the result that they did based on qualifying performance. But they had a disaster class in quali, a disaster class in the sprint, and it continues today. So Russell crashed, of course, in yesterday's qualifying session. They spent longer than 2 hours trying to fix his car, and therefore, because they were outside of that allocation, they were forced to start from the pit lane today, and because they ran out of new parts, they had to revert to the Singapore spec, which actually proved to be pretty damn good in the hands of George Russell today. He made a lot of progress in the field, and I'm sure that will have Mercedes thinking. I'm sure they would have liked to see how Hamilton got on with the newer upgrades in the car, but it turns out those new upgrades, the balance is still shambolic, right? And it was an interesting decision for Mercedes to start Russell from the pit lane, but leave Hamilton out there, because they could have decided with Lewis's car to change everything, start Hamilton from the pit lane anyway, and then have both of their cars starting from the field. It would have looked terrible, right, to have both your cars starting from the pit lane, but it was probably the thing to do. Leaving Hamilton out there with a setup that they admitted and he knew was terrible after qualifying. Like, what's the point on some level? The balance was all over the place, but they decided that it was better off leaving Hamilton out P17 than starting him from the pit lane with a different setup, and I think that came back to bite both driver and team. So Russell starts from the pits with new setup, and of course Hamilton starts P70 with no setup changes, so this can't possibly end badly. But let's talk about the start of the race. It turns out the Ferraris were the fastest cars today, but this initial moment, and probably as a result of that, Lando might not have been able to win anyway, even if he'd held on to the lead at the start. But nonetheless, we still have the same old situation. This time Lando even gets away well. The problem is he doesn't defend as aggressively as he needs to. You've got to understand, Verstappen is like the new Schumacher on some levels. Like, he will not yield at all. The guy is impossible to pass on some level, and we know how difficult it is. We've said this in many recent videos. Like, if Max is in front of you, good luck getting past him. You've got to keep him behind if you've got track position, and Lando just, I guess, underestimates Max, doesn't defend as aggressively as he needs to, because Max is going to send it down the inside if you leave the door open. Lando didn't leave much of a door open, but he left enough for Max to absolutely send it, force Lando off the track, and I think Max just about keeps it within track limits. This was his onboard, so I think he just about kept it within, and obviously Max knowing around and forcing Lando off, that's my championship rival. If the Ferraris get through, the Ferraris get through, but Max knows he's in a championship fight here. He knows how to win championship battles. he knows where to take battles, right? His battle was with Lando, not necessarily with the Ferraris. So he was okay with allowing Leclerc to do exactly what Norris did in the sprint yesterday. But Lando's just got to recognize when Max is in that position, he's going to send it down the inside. He's going to force you off the track. That's what he's going to do. You can't give him any chance to allow him to do that. And, you know, Lando leaves the door marginally open, gets pushed all the way down to 4th place. I mean, it was a disaster of a start for Lando. And honestly, at this point, it felt like his championship ambitions are slipping away from him, and they most certainly have after today. Even if this penalty gets overturned, we'll talk about that in the coming minutes, of course. It looked like nearly both Ferraris were going to get through, but no, Leclerc starting from 4th place. Let's not forget, he started from 4th in Monza and went on to win that race. And I said going into today, right, a victory for Ferrari was absolutely on the cards, and I knew there was going to be some drama at turn 1. It just didn't turn out to be quite the drama that I expected. And Norris is like, yeah, he pushed me off. The reality is, it's lap 1, turn 1. Often these incidents are held in different regards than instants later in the race, which is why it is surprising to me what happens when we get to lap 53 or whatever it was with Lando and Max. This was Sainz completely pushing Max off the track here, and both of them went very wide. Max then takes the position back, and you know, this was fine because clearly Sainz was also off the track. Verstappen was clearly off the track as well, and Max holds on to the 2nd place. That seems fine, but then again, is that incredibly different to what happened at the end of the race between Max and Lando? Not necessarily. In this case, to be fair, Sainz went for a major dive bomb down the inside, which is not what Lando did. He went to overtake on the outside. So the circumstances are different, and that is critical to understanding why the stewards have made the decision they did. Is it the right decision? Is it fair? That is still another argument. But the argument from the stewards is, well, you know, Sainz here was sending a super dive bomb down the inside of Max, forces Max off the track, both of them go wide. That's Max's place to keep. If you overtake on the outside of the corner, then theoretically it becomes a slightly different story, but I'm not necessarily sure that is so fair. Leclerc up 3 places on the opening lap and a lead that he would not yield the entire Grand Prix. Verstappen and Sainz were then going to do battle. It looked like early on that, you know, Verstappen was going to come back at Leclerc maybe, but that never really seemed to be a possibility. Hamilton, by the way, had a mega start. He sent it down the inside of so many drivers at turn 1, kind of not caused, but the incident between, I think it was Albon and Ocon, when Ocon got spun around. 3 cars didn't go into one corner, and because Hamilton was on the inside, Albon had no room. He ends up spinning Ocon around, but Hamilton makes a great start, fair overtakes, I think, sends it down the inside on the hard tyres. He's up to 12th, and then just a couple of seconds later is in the gravel. And it's so rare that you see Hamilton make a mistake like this at the start of a Grand Prix. And let's just have a quick look at it, right? So this was the onboard, and this is exactly what happened to George Russell in yesterday's qualifying session, right? He sent it into the final corner. He hits a bit of a bump, and the rear of the car just gives up on him. Like, the rear just disappears from underneath him and he's round. I mean, he just can't do anything about it. The rear just slides away at this point, and it's not like he was pushing flat out. I mean, this is what he went on to say after crashing out. He was like, that's never happened before. I wasn't even pushing. Like, it's never happened before. Never spun off in the race. It's not that I wasn't focused. I was just caught by surprise by this bouncing I had. So, and he was like, look, if you guys had maybe changed my setup or something and not given me the same problematic setup as yesterday, could have been a different story. So just a confusing day for Mercedes. On a day that they brought so many upgrades this weekend, that Mercedes were meant to bounce back. Like, if I had to predict this weekend, I thought a Mercedes podium for Hamilton, given he's so good around here, was definitely on the cards. They weren't even close today. And Russell was competitive, but nowhere near good enough on the course of the weekend. Lap 6, Verstappen was close to Leclerc, Sainz was close to Verstappen, and it looked like we had a serious race on our hands for the win. But as the laps went on, it was quite clear that, again, this Ferrari just has so much race pace. And this has been the thing with Ferrari. If they can get the lead, it's tough to overtake them because their race pace is so good, their tyre deck is so good. It's just they qualify further back because they can't quite switch the tyres on in quali, and that affects their race. But after Leclerc took the lead here, I was pretty convinced he was going to win this Grand Prix because the Ferrari looked rapid in the sprint, and also a Ferrari that didn't bring major upgrades this weekend. They have some planned for Mexico, I believe, but they just wanted to see what their Singapore package would do here, knowing that they're going to have it dialed in. And, you know, what a fight we have for the Constructors as well. Like, Ferrari could win the Constructors' Championship this year. They could certainly, probably will, overtake Red Bull at this rate. Like, Red Bull are probably going to be third in this year's Constructors on this current evidence. And maybe Ferrari can win the whole thing. I genuinely feel on some level that Leclerc is a deserving World Drivers' Champion this year, but he's not going to win it, unfortunately for him. Just that stint and the upgrade that Ferrari brought in Spain that made their balance bad for a few rounds. Like, if they didn't bring that upgrade, genuinely Leclerc could be champion this year, and I feel like he would absolutely deserve it if he was. But they're just a bit too far behind. But of course, the Constructors is still on, and at this point, Leclerc was banging in laps, nobody could match them. Obviously, Sainz was in the dirty air of Max, so making that was difficult to occur. Obviously, Sainz is having problems as well. His car smelled like fuel. It sounded like his car was going to explode. Eventually, Ferrari get on top of things. Gasly, we didn't even really mention Gasly much yesterday, but he had a stellar qualifying session. Unfortunately for him, when he then eventually pits onto new tyres, the car was terrible. So that was unfortunate. Russell was making some progress. Tsunoda at this point was in a decent spot, and Lawson was actually on a great strategy. This hard-medium strategy today worked out very well for many drivers. The overcut tended to work really well, and the tyres were lasting again longer than expected, right? It's one of these weird things. Pirelli come up before the race and they say, oh, you've got a two-stop it, guys, got a two-stop it. The one-stop was easy, not even close. People doing 35 laps on a set of mediums, right? It's like, you know, what's going on here? Why does nobody understand the tyres? Pirelli don't understand the tyres. The teams don't understand the tyres. It's confusing the way this rubber is designed. Now, GP comes on the radio and tells Max, hey, we've got an issue with the car piston. We're going to try and sort it out. So there was clearly some sort of problem here that maybe was holding back Max's pace, but they thought they could fix it at the stop. Either they tried or they didn't, but it didn't really matter at the end of the day because clearly the car wasn't performing as they wanted it to. Now, this is a crucial incident in the context of the Grand Prix. Russell overtakes Bottas here and forces him off the track. So you can see Russell makes the corner. Bottas does obviously not make the corner because he was forced wide. But crucially, Russell overtook on the inside. So took the inside line, was maybe level at the apex or something, maybe slightly behind at the apex. The stewards determined, I guess, that Russell was behind at the apex and forced the other driver off the track. That is a 5-second penalty for doing so. In the grand scheme of things, it worked out for Russell. Takes the 5-second penalty, takes his pit stop and still does a great Grand Prix in the end. Max was complaining about the tyres, struggling with that. He reckoned it was an incredibly challenging race today. And this is all happening on before lap 18 of the Grand Prix. At this point, though, it seems pretty obvious that the undercut was possible. And again, I'm somewhat confused by Red Bull's strategy. I know that they didn't have the pace of the Ferraris, but to allow Sainz to just freely undercut Max, I thought was a tad confusing. Sainz pitted, and after one lap, if Max pitted immediately, it would have been close on the exit of turn one. As soon as Max didn't respond, as soon as the team didn't respond, Sainz had the undercut done, and Sainz had P2 locked up. That was secure. I guess maybe Red Bull thought there's no point fighting Sainz. We're just going to fight Lando here and try and hold on to third on the podium, which eventually they did in controversial fashion. At this point, though, Lando was 4 seconds behind Max. It looked like, yeah, the McLaren's still a bit of a handful. But again, if there was one car that had the best tyre degradation on the grid, apart from maybe the Ferrari, today it was the McLaren. They went so long, impressively long on the medium tyres, and Lando was closing up 2.8 behind. Max eventually comes into the box. Lando stays out there for a few more laps. He takes the lead. Leclerc comes into the pits. Clear one-stop strategy for the Ferraris. Sainz in a similar position as well. Verstappen was then 4 seconds behind Sainz on 4-lap fresher tyres, but that meant nothing in the grand scheme of the Grand Prix. So the McLaren had good pace. Eventually they come into the box here. Lando then falls a few seconds behind Verstappen on about 6 lap or so fresher tyres, and within a few laps he starts to make some gains. Now Russell, Lawson, Colapinto, the guys that started on hards I believe and of course ran it through the Grand Prix, they were in a great position to do some damage, and Perez therefore was in a tricky spot. Perez got again stuck behind Yuki Tsunoda for several laps as well, and here he was stuck behind Franco Colapinto. Colapinto with another sensational race today for Williams. But yeah, Perez, not a great showing from him again, and Liam Lawson, it was tough because Yuki got a 5-second penalty, but a great debut for Lawson, right? We talked about that if Lawson wants to get Perez's drive next year, he has to outperform Yuki over these last few rounds, and probably do as well as Yuki for the first couple of rounds, then take him over. Today, I think Yuki was arguably the better driver this weekend, but Lawson had the better strategy, and Yuki made a couple of errors this Grand Prix. Of course, the penalty didn't help either, which allowed Lawson to get the position on him and capitalise on exactly that. Charles was getting told, by the way, to lift and coast, and many were kind of scared that the Ferrari were running into engine problems or some sort of issue like that. It may have been fuel-related, of course, as well. But at this point in the Grand Prix, nothing was especially happening apart from the fact that Russell and these guys had to pit and whether they could make the comeback on the drivers in front. But it was really about Lando versus Verstappen at this point, right? Lando was lapping, a second lap quicker than Max at this point, closing in by a significant rate of knots. And within a few laps, it was obvious Lando was going to get a chance to have a run on Max and try and win. Now, honestly, I thought we were going to have an Imola 2.0, and that's kind of what we got, right? When Lando closed up on Max, but he was just not able to overtake, didn't have the traction out of the key corners. But of course, around COTA, there are more overtaking opportunities. So Lando was always going to get a couple of chances, but it's just so hard to overtake Max. And of course, the dirty air through Sector 1, where the Red Bull is so strong, that's always going to be a challenge leading into the DRS zone down the back straight. So for a few laps, Lando was super close following Max through the corners. It looked like he's going to have a couple of chances. He was just a little bit far behind. He had a couple of opportunities to maybe send a massive dive bomb down the inside, but he elected against it and wanted to do the move clean, and he nearly got the chance to do exactly that. So they were battling hard. Max had the defensive lines through these corners down to a T. He was doing them the whole weekend, actually, like the way to take the inside line into this corner, switch that back to the inside line again, and then maintain the inside line again, right? So, allowing the other driver to weave all over the road and maintaining the optimal racing line in terms of holding on to the position, right? But it was this lap that was critical. So the next lap, Lando has his chance, and Max is very aggressive defending the inside line. What Lando should have done turn 1, to be honest, right? So Max defends the inside. There's no way for Lando to go there. So his only option is to try and go around the outside. The problem is you go around the outside, Max is going to push you off. That's how it is, right? You know what you're gonna get. And that's exactly what Max does. The critical screenshot, though, I would say, is this one, because if Max holds the line on the inside, and Lando, was he clearly ahead of the apex? It's marginal. The rules are so grey on this, right? It's like, oh, well, was the car on the outside ahead? Well, he's got to be significantly alongside or ahead, or the front wheels to the back wheels, and they're written in a certain way, but even the stewards themselves don't really think they know what they're doing here. But if Max had stayed within the white line, no problem as far as I'm concerned. If Lando keeps the position at that point, definite penalty for Lando, leaving the track gaining an advantage. In this instance, though, Lando goes off the road. Max goes off the road too. And so has Max not forced Lando off the track? I mean, surely he has done by the regulations that are written in terms of the driving rules. Now, Lando decides to hold on to the lead here, and he then tries to drive away. He gets a 4-second lead and then gets slapped with a 5-second penalty, putting him behind Max at the end of the Grand Prix. Super controversial, right? Because the thing that annoys me about this the most is that if Lando decided to yield, if Lando said, all right, you know what, Max, I'm not going to hold on to this position, I'm going to give you it back, then the stewards would probably have given Max a penalty for forcing Lando off the track. That's like the wild thing about this, that they say that they don't give the outcomes of these decisions based on results. It's about the situation, all about the outcome, it's about the intent or whatever. But it's clearly not true. Like, if Lando just slots in behind Max again and says, right, I'll give it another go, or if he says Max should get a penalty for that, they probably have to give Max a penalty, you would think, because Max has then clearly just forced another driver off the track, maintains that position if Lando was to have yielded, and he's done so while being off the track himself. Slam dunk 5-second penalty, is it not for Max in that case? But because Lando keeps the position, Lando's getting a 5-second pen. Like, what do you mean? It just doesn't make any sense to me. So, as I say, the context is different to the Sainz incident, to the Russell instance, because Lando was overtaken on the outside. But to me, I just can't see how this is a 5-second penalty. But, well, for Norris anyway. So very much intrigued to your thoughts in a comment. Norris then drives off into the sunset, but he can't quite pull the 5 seconds he needs. And in the end, these were your finishing positions. So the Ferraris, a mega 1-2 for them. Like, what a championship they are building on. And what a day in the office for the Scuderia. Lando then drops behind Verstappen. So it goes Verstappen, Norris, Piastri. Russell got Perez at the end as well. A pretty dismal day at the office of Perez, losing to a driver that started from the pit lane and had a 5-second penalty. Hulkenberg, Lawson, Colapinto rounding out the points. So Max ends the day extending his championship lead to 57 points now ahead of Lando Norris. With 5 races to go and a couple of sprints in there in the mix, you gotta think it's basically championship over at this point. But the drama is not going to stop there. Toto Wolff actually waded into this. I'll firstly say what Lando said. So Lando basically said that he reckons the punishments were inconsistent. And I mean, look, you see the Russell penalty, the Norris penalty, and no penalty for Max, given what happened in the race. And you've got to wonder, like, how these things are happening. And Toto certainly wonders. Even Toto, the man that would love to have Max driving for Mercedes next year, says the following. And Toto's careful with his words here, but it's quite clear what he thinks. Yesterday, we saw moves exactly the same which weren't penalised, racing for positions actually, and today, completely bizarre. I think we know why, but I can't say that on television. Sometimes there's correlation. Basically implying biased decision making, the way, favouring Max Verstappen, right? I mean, what else can you read into it? And Ted then says, like, do you mean that there's certain individuals making these decisions? Derek Warwick and the boys in the stewards room, and Max taking advantage of this. And Toto's like, well, you said that, not me. At the end of the day, it's a difficult job. But yeah, wow, what is your perspective on this? At the end of the day, I think all people want in this sport is some degree of consistency, right? If the rule is the rule, then use the rule and punish it in the same way every time. Does not seem to be how things work here in Formula 1. Will McLaren appeal this? Will they try? Can they try? Like, what's going to happen before the end of the day over there in Texas? I don't know the answers to that one quite yet, but I'm very much intrigued to your thoughts as ever on all this stuff in the comment section below. Andrea Stella giving his perspective as well. But, we don't want to take anything away from Charles Leclerc, who was undoubtedly the driver of the day. So hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.